Hello everyone, and welcome to this WBEF Week Fringe session on innovative infrastructure delivery. My name is Andrew Knight. I lead our work on data and technology here at RICS, and I'm joined here today by Neil Robertson, Chief Executive of the National Skills Academy for Rail. Today we'll be discussing innovative infrastructure delivery and how data, technology and modern methods of construction can help drive productivity, efficiency, value for money, social value and sustainability, all tenets of modern infrastructure. I'll be talking to Neil about a recent initiative called the TIES Living Lab. And TIES stands for Transport Infrastructure Energy Strategy, which I can imagine made it much easier to call it TIES, didn't it? And how, as well as transport, the application of data, technology and modern methods of construction and lessons learned will also have benefits for the wider infrastructure sector. So perhaps, Neil, before we get into the questions, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your background and indeed what the National Skills Academy for Rail is about.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. So yes, TIES stands for the Transport Infrastructure Efficiency Strategy, and NSAR was one of the organisations that contributed to some of the initial thinking for the task force. We conducted a review of what's worked in infrastructure to improve productivity, and we developed a framework arising from that. And I'm happy to say that the TIES project addresses 3 of the 6 areas that we identified as priorities. The other ones around people and capability and skills are a kind of core territory for NSAR and are taken care of in a different strategy called TEST, strangely, the Transport the Transport Employment and Skills Task Force. So there's lots of action. But I suppose the point is really that we in transport infrastructure have seen other sectors go ahead of us in terms of improving productivity. And we're spending a lot of money, rightly, on transport infrastructure. So the government particularly were very concerned that we improve the efficiency of that spend. And of course, incorporate modern methods, all the latest thinking. So TIES Living Lab was very much a demonstration project. We weren't inventing the wheel, that's been invented elsewhere. We were applying known, tried, tested, trusted, approved strategies in a fairly intensive way across quite a wide range of applications or situations, let's say, in transport infrastructure. And I'll say more about them in a minute. But I think I'd want the candidates to know that actually it was really quite an intensive project with over 20 partners. The clients, suppliers put a lot of money in, and also the Innovate UK and DFT funded it. So we were ambitious, and and despite COVID, we've delivered on that ambition. And there were moments I thought we wouldn't, but I'm very happy to say we have, and we've got a real learning in all of those areas. And the last thing to say is the headline is we proved that it can be done.
So to tell me a bit more about the organisations that got involved in TIES Living Labs and the projects, because there were multiple projects as I understand it. And I think the rationale is kind of clear, but it obviously, as you said, covered a lot of areas as well, didn't it?
It did, Andrew. At times it felt like every man and their dog was involved. But the more responsible answer is that all the DFT, of course, and with support from BAYS and the IPA, and the IPA served on the governance board. NSAR's role was project management, and then you work through the supply chain. So we had all the major clients in transport infrastructure contributed according to their abilities and the stage that they were at. The biggest contributors were Network Rail and TfL, but all the major clients were involved. And then within their projects, you had a number of different partners ranging from academics. So we brought in the academics and we managed to get them speaking to the industrial people. We had SMEs, and that was a particular feature, Andrew, and it wasn't easy. The big clients are used to working with SMEs, and there was risk. There's quite a lot of risk involved in that. And again, that was largely successful. We did have one casualty, but that was a big part of the story. And then you had the different kinds of suppliers, tier ones, tier twos, all playing according to their strengths, really. And but the goodwill towards it made it happen, and the experience of it happening elsewhere de-risked it for everybody.
And as I understand it, was fairly broad in terms of the kind of topic areas you looked at. I mean, you've mentioned, modern methods of construction, MMC, but what were some of the other areas that the Living Labs actually looked like and rolled their sleeves up and actually got really kind of deep into?
Off-site manufacture and the role of that in upgrades, signaling equipment rooms, which was basically a standardization project, and benchmarking. So benchmarking within transport, and of course looking across to other sectors. Apologies for the background noise there. Social value. I mean, two things crept up on us during the project, because it was 4 years in the making. Sorry, there's some excitement.
Don't
worry. So two things assumed a greater priority as we went along. One was social value, and you referred to that earlier, and the science of social value is still developing, isn't it? And the other, of course, was carbon. And carbon went rapidly up the agenda, and we had decided at the outset that we wanted to understand the carbon impact of all of our, mainly financial efficiency targets. But actually, I was very happy to say we had some great partners, and the carbon findings were quite dramatic, actually.
And in terms of, I mean, you mentioned there was a particular challenge around working with SMEs. How did you overcome those, and what were the kind of lessons learned about potentially that kind of challenge, but other challenges that came out of the woodwork, if I can use that phrase?
Yes, cash flow, SMEs, the issue of cash flow is a well-known problem. And we certainly experienced some of that, particularly because of the way that funding works. Public funding has to be checked carefully. There's always a bit of a delay, and SMEs were affected by that. Of course, COVID happened, and that you might have noticed, and that affected everybody, didn't it? But in a sense, the SMEs were the least well placed to cope with that because of resources. But I think if you like, intellectually, I think the biggest challenge for them was actually for the clients, because the clients are used to specifying, which is then whereas here we had SMEs bringing innovation, admittedly tried and tested elsewhere, but not in this context. And so making a footbridge, an offsite is not easy. But we showed that it could be done. But the applying it then in a railway setting with all the safety rules and the access arrangements. So the SMEs didn't have experience of that, and I have to say, it required quite a lot of flexibility from the clients. And again, we showed it can be done, but there's plenty of learning that we can take forward from it. But we are being asked, aren't we? The government are saying, look, we need to be working. We need to see more of the innovation and agility that comes with the smaller companies. Standardization, Andrew, is a well-known question and has led to lots of opportunities elsewhere. But equally, the innovation is at what point do you standardize, and have because the minute you standardize, you stop the innovation process, don't you? In some ways, or in terms of film. So we had that debate as well, and we had communities of practice who were thinking across all of these things out with their narrow projects. So we had the various projects and they went cross-cutting things. And we've created, Andrew, a community of people who understand now much better how to do these things. And I think probably the one area that we would have liked to have done more on had we really thought about it and planned for it, is around capability. And that's one of the areas NSAR is picking up and taking forward now, because the capability of your average managers, let's say, average middle managers in infrastructure, and this is not in any way confined to transport, and we've seen this in other settings. There's a capability here, gap here, that managers need to understand how and when to apply these techniques, modern methods, and how to contract them as well. So sorry for that long answer, but it was probably the most interesting intellectually part of the process was the adjustments that all the parties had to make to work with each other.
Thanks, Neil. Now, one area that's always close to my heart is the whole kind of topic of data. And obviously, in many respects, construction infrastructure, you have lots of data, but it isn't necessarily shared as easily as possible. It's not necessarily standardized. Sometimes there can be, let's say, question marks over the quality of that data. I mean, how did the Ties Living Lab projects look at this whole issue of data, and what did we learn, and what are those wider learnings for the sector as a whole about how we can use data better?
Andrew, you were very kind and gentle. Thank you for that gentleness. Data, as you said, is a problematic. It's a huge opportunity, and I think the scale of the opportunity of data drove us through the challenges there. One of the things we did at the outset was a collaboration agreement, and that took 3 months. And well, I was very grateful for that, because that created some of the safe space for people to share data, and this is perhaps won't surprise you, share what the data they don't have. So clients have the clients have a certain kind of data, and the tier 1 suppliers have a different kind of data. And but with the objectivity of having our analytical consortium, which was chaired by Professor Malcolm Horner, who's well known in this field, so that had a credibility, a gravitas that encouraged people to release data. I think we still would say that we felt there was more to come from the benchmarking, and the data quality didn't, we weren't overwhelmed by data quality either, but we made some real progress. And I think in the areas of whole life costs was the area that I got most excited about in relation to that, because whole life costs, we knew from our other work, whole life costs and whole life value are a fundamental starting point for lots of innovation and productivity. That's what creates the incentives for the investment, isn't it? And we've seen it in utilities, offshore wind particularly. So that understanding of whole life cost, I mean, everybody knew what a bridge cost, everybody knew what a certain length of road or track or an equipment room cost, but the whole life nature of it was really where we all learned. And I would say, if I was being completely candid with you, I would give us probably overall a 6 out of 10 on that. And I think we learned what we don't know as much as what we do know, but we've all come out of this absolutely convinced that whole life value is a game changer for us.
And obviously, given the importance, I mean, the value for money is obviously always a key driver, and obviously that has to rely on benchmarking so much. What learnings came out? And obviously, as you said, I think you gave yourself a 6 out of 10. I mean, there's obviously on one level a technical issue around standardization of data, because obviously there are multiple standards out there, whether it's RMM or SMM or SESM and ICMS at a high level. You've got that technical issue, but arguably you've also got that kind of behavioral issue about sharing data more widely, which perhaps is a bigger barrier than some of the technical things. What are your thoughts on that?
Andrew, you've said it absolutely correctly there. You're right about standardization. I was saying we're lucky to have Malcolm Horner and his colleagues, because they were very much on top of that issue. So I would say that standardization was less of a barrier than the culture of releasing data, and the culture of sharing, actually, we don't know. And particularly in relation to what's the impact of this particular CapEx investment on our OpEx? And but what you have to be, if you allow us to continue to be gentle, then this question is one that the clients, truthfully, in terms of design, the designers have always taken that view. So let's say slab track on HS2, much more expensive, but much lower maintenance. So the knowledge is there, but it hasn't been required systematically by regulators or by policymakers. So we're asking people to do something systematically that perhaps they'd never been asked to do before. And the normal commercial imperatives that drive some of these things naturally in advanced manufacturing, utilities, wider construction, they're made a bit more opaque by, of course, the involvement of public funding and the different sometimes the shorter term kind of timescales that are given to that. But what did we specifically learn? We learned that if you invest in making a digital twin of your infrastructure, your assets. One example was in terms of cable route management. That's a big investment to make that. It takes a long time. But we shaved not just months, but years of the process of deciding where to route the cables when you upgrade, how to optimize that. So that investment was very much one that we saw a spectacular return from. But you'd have to understand the whole costs and the whole time frame of doing this before. So I think we understood about timelines better than we understood about some of the actual costs and cost benefits. But again, we improved on that. In terms of building the footbridge, building an offsite building a footbridge offsite doesn't save you that much.
Yeah.
But it saves a lot of carbon, and in terms of fitting it, implementing it, actually putting it into its place over the road or the railway, that's where we got the savings. So what might have taken 9 months took 3 months.
As you say, it's interesting that the multiple dimensions you need to think about. It's not just, as you say, just CapEx. It's looking forward to the OpEx, and it's looking at the carbon impact. And as you say, it's not necessarily saving money in one area, but it's the other benefits that flow. I guess one thing that fascinates me, Neil, is that I guess that the public particularly just get focused on new infrastructure, big things like HS2, but obviously, as you know better than I do, there's this huge requirement now for ongoing replacement of aging existing infrastructure. Where do you see things like MMC playing a role in that ongoing, that continual, retrofit, or replacement of all these assets that have been around for so long?
They're very tired. Yeah. Well, the first, the I think had something to say about that from a range of perspectives. One was the actual access. Yeah. So access to live infrastructure, whether it be a road or a railway, is very difficult. So HS2 put a bridge over the M42 over Christmas. Yeah, but they made it off-site. Now it was only 400. Was it 100 meters, say, off-site, something like that? But so the actual impact on the traveling public was tiny. So that's one of the things we're learning, is how you can reduce or improve the availability of the asset during the upgrade or maintenance. Another one is if you understand the whole life costs of, say, you're replacing a whole load of, let's say, overhead line or that kind of existing infrastructure. You can invest in, if you understand the whole life costs, you can invest in plant, big bits of plant. And we've seen that investment made in terms of replacing the sleepers and the track, but we haven't done that so much for the other infrastructure. And then another area I would point to in relation to the maintenance is this point about digital twinning. And understanding digitally your assets allows you to do a lot of the work before you're even, what you're going to find when you get there.
Yeah.
And that's often what the engineers will tell you is the biggest challenge. You want to put a pile in for some overhead line. gantry for the overhead line, and then you don't know what the environment you're drilling into is.
Indeed. One thing that struck me when we were talking about modern methods of construction in both new build and this retrofit is that you're taking a process and effectively now putting that in a factory setting, and there's almost that sort of challenge about the sort of lack of visibility now, the management of that, because obviously you're moving from a situation where, from a construction management perspective, you're on site, you see it all coming together, the materials are coming in, and now you've got this level of abstraction to say, well, there's a big factory somewhere, and how did Ties look at that kind of, not so much disconnect, but the fact you've now got that degree of separation from what is hopefully a well-run manufacturing plant, but you haven't got that visibility now. It's happening in almost a black box.
Yes, I think it's a great question, Andrew. And there were two dimensions that. First of all, there was the communication requirements between the factory and the intended end site, and that was a feature. I mean, we were successful in that, and that the communication was good, but it required quite a lot of communication. I think you're perhaps hinting that colleagues in construction are typically fairly practical people and would like to see it all in front of them, don't they? So there is a trust issue. The other area we looked at, and we used AI to do this, and particularly the University of the West of England focused on this, was how the logistics, because getting the bridge or the thing into place requires an understanding of logistics. And typically these are bigger, and again, this is a well-known and understood thing in construction of offices and flats and that kind of thing. But it's not something we've thought about so much in transport infrastructure. So I would say the logistics was one of the big areas, and using AI to work out what's the optimal way of getting the pieces to site, these bigger pieces to site. And we haven't used AI for that before, and we saw an exciting role for it in future.
Indeed. Now, you touched earlier on one of the issues that Ties looked at was this whole area, and as you said yourself, it's an emerging area of social value and how we measure that. And clearly there's a lot of focus now, and some of the rhetoric around even the naming of the various infrastructure bills around the world, that this sense of leveling up, of making sure that infrastructure delivers value above and beyond a very basic return on investment. But what did Ties look at? And given that there is this continuing maturity, hopefully, of how we measure social value, whether it's jobs created, community engagement, what were the outcomes and the learnings on this, as you say, emerging science?
Well, one of the things was we collected a lot of the current thinking and created a tool for measuring social value in transport infrastructure. So we've made it simple for other people to measure it in a fairly standardized way. So we will hopefully be comparing apples with apples the next time we're comparing projects. And so we've developed a tool that uses the Cabinet Office framework as one of its start points to really understand how many jobs were created, how many people benefited, and if you then put that together with the better understood transport connectivity benefits, if you like, then you can get you can start to make judgments about which of the following investments will have the biggest social return. And one particular area that we focused on and has been an area that's been particularly important is, of course, jobs, and especially in relation to the current skills shortage facing the industry. So how many new jobs have you created? How many of those have gone to disadvantaged people or people with disadvantaged communities? And I'm particularly excited about that, because that has made investments viable that would not have got over the line purely on their transport merits only. So I've seen this transformed over the last 5 years. We're having much more sophisticated discussions now. And there's a data point here. So to understand whether you've got a new job you have to understand the workforce in the area. You have to know where the depot is going to be. Where's that line or road going? Who's going to use that? Who's going to build this? Yeah. So in a way, the science of forecasting your future workforce has moved on exponentially, and I think you will see that happening even more, because one of the consequences of the current skill shortage is that, and this is right across construction, of course, and it's well documented, but documenting is one thing, actually responding to it is another, is we cannot expect to go to the market and find the skilled labor we need. So we're going to have to grow more of our own. So where do we do it? How do we do it? And how do we get people further from the labor market into those roles? And we could talk about diversity as well, but but it's so that's really exciting, Andrew, really. And again, we made useful progress on this to contribute to the wider understanding. And I would say that when everybody nods if you say social value, who's going to disagree with it? But now, if you took an average sample of 10 senior managers and said to them, what is social value? Yes, you've just nodded, but what do you understand by social value? I would say we'd have a much bigger overlap in what that means for people. And we can put pound signs on it.
Indeed. Now, I suppose a final thought from me, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Neil, is obviously we talked about lots of data and technology and modern methods of construction, off-site construction, and one area where I hope that we've learned how we can leverage these in a good way. It's not just the social value, but the environmental impact. Because clearly, infrastructure has a huge impact on the environment, and we want to turn that around from being, dare I say it, negative to being positive in terms of land use, in terms of the way the infrastructure can actually help the environment. Where do you see that heading in terms of how these new practices can actually almost have a beneficial effect on the environment?
Oh, listen, Andrew, it's so exciting. I mean, you'd have to be in quite a bad place not to be excited about what the potential is here, because again, it's something we haven't generally considered before, is it? So suddenly we've been told, well, think about the environment, and everyone's glad to. The goodwill for it is overwhelming. But what do we do? And do we spend 100 grand on electric vehicles, electric plant? And the answer is yes. But do we, or do we spend money making things off-site? And the answer is yes. But what we've learned is a bit more about when you would do that and how you would get the benefits. And as I mentioned earlier in one of my long-winded answers to your question, is that we were blown away by the carbon benefits. And the other thing that's quite interesting, I would hesitate to call it an insight, because it's an observation of mine. And certainly you can see it in the data, is that if you do things quicker, there's an environmental benefit straight away, because you've got fewer visits, just less activity.
Yeah.
So we all know that time is money, but time is carbon as well. So that's, I think, an observation we would make. And the more you plan up front using technology, and it sounds obvious to say that, but actually, if you've never done it before and then you've done it and you find it's true, then it encourages you to go at scale. And that's really the next thing. There's nothing earth-shattering. No one would be surprised by any one piece of data that we got in this space, except I think probably the scale of it. And when you're talking about 70% reductions in carbon for a particular asset, replacement or upgrade or change. And then I think the last thing to say on this is technology itself. Now we've talked about how technology can help us do our normal thing, but actually technology can help us do a different thing. And that's the true environmental benefits will come when we don't do an analog thing using digital help. So we do it better, faster, greener using the digital tools. That's great, but actually the future is we won't be doing an analog thing. We'll be doing a digital thing, and we'll be using data to do demand management. We'll be using digital signaling to create capacity on our network, and smart motorways, the signaling on the tube. These have all created significant additional capacity without pouring any concrete, and that's really where you get the savings. So, you know, the future will be not lots of new, big, shiny projects. I hope there'll be some, but, you know, making better use of what we have now optimally is where the data is showing us that we can really make the next big step.
Indeed. Well, it's been fascinating to hear all the outputs of TIES, and I guess the key now is to use all this learning and implement it, isn't it? So.
It is, Andrew, and that's to use it and to equip our workforce, both at all levels of the workforce, to be able to do it as well. Because, you know, bits of construction can look a bit medieval, can't they? But we're well on this journey, and we're very grateful for the encouragement we've had in transport from wider infrastructure and wider construction that have given us the confidence. We're a pretty risk-averse bunch in transport infrastructure. That's code for things don't change very fast, right? But, you know, I think the genie's out the bottle on this. And it took other people being brave in other environments to show us the way. But listen, we're copying with pride, and you will see a lot more of this. And you know, I gave you the example from HS2 of the bridge, but there's also all the work they've been doing on electric plant, which is, you know, so the pace it's exponential.
Well, that's great to hear. Well, it's been a fascinating discussion, Neil. Thanks ever so much for your time. Once again, thanks. Look forward to talking to you soon again.
And thank you so much. It's been great. And thank you for being gentle with us as well.